Hey everybody, Happy New Year, and I hope you had a good Christmas. I did want to share something I did back in December. It was with salt dough. Um, there's a couple of different ways to do it, but I did a basic salt dough. I'm just mixing up the flour and the salt here and adding some warm water. I went as warm as my hands could stand to try to dissolve that salt a little bit. This was really more of an experiment than anything else because I wanted to know about longevity. How long was it going to take to dry once I made my ornament or whatever I was going to make with it. And I wanted to know how it would last. Would it crack? Things like that. So, one thing that you can do is color your water. If you want to make several batches, you could make a red, a green, whatever you're going to make. You can pre-color it by coloring the water instead of painting. Now, the reason I was mixing it there with my hands was you want the texture to feel like Play-Doh. And so I just mixed it with my hands so that I knew when I got the texture right. But it is, as you can see, a basic dough. I've already done that little snowman there. And since it's more of a test, I didn't really want to put all the effort into coloring the dough. I just wanted to get these things made and then watch them and see if they were going to crack or anything like that. So one thing that did surprise me is how long it took for them to dry. It was days to dry. And when you look at that little thing, you think it's just big balls of the dough, but actually you use Reynolds wrap or some kind of a tin foil, and you made two little balls, one a little larger for the bottom of the snowman and one a little smaller. And then you just take a flattened piece of dough and wrap it. So it's not as much dough as you think. And so I was very surprised at how long it did take them to dry. You can also, if you are used to using polymer clay and things like that, you already may have some tools that you could use, and that would be great. But you don't necessarily have to. You'll see there that I just used a plastic knife, and I used the serrated edges to my advantage when I was making a fringe. I also used a skewer, the pointed end and the flat end. So just things like that around the house you'll be able to use. Now on this one, I'm actually just put the little snowman aside. I wanted to try a Santa because you can do a different technique with the Santa, which you'll see. But right there, I'm just making the center. I wanted it kind of an oval shape because I'm attaching a hat and a beard. And so kind of like an egg or an oval. I did decide to make the back of it flat instead of trying to go all the way around it, because it was going to be hard for it to dry if I was trying to go all the way around it without the gravity making one side of it flat anyway. So I just went with a flat back. I would say use the cheapest tin foil you can. Back when I was doing a lot of paper mache, that cheap tin foil was the best because you could really shape it. Whereas what I had in my kitchen was the heavy duty tin foil, and it's pretty thick and it was a little bit harder to work with, but I made it work. But just a tip, get the cheap stuff. So there I'm just kind of smoothing it out as best you can with this type of a dough and making sure there's no visible seams, that they just kind of come together on the back there. And then we're going to use a glue mixture, which all I did was I took a cup and I dropped a piece of the dough down in there. It doesn't have to be a big piece at all. Put a tablespoon of water or so down in there, enough to dissolve that dough. And then your bigger pieces, I didn't find I needed it, but when I was putting smaller pieces on, like the snowman's buttons or coal, on his belly, those little pieces like that, I did put a little bit of the glue on there so that it would help those two meld together. The hat here went all the way around it, and then I personally like the look of the folded over hat, so that was another spot that it was going to be touching, so I felt okay about that part. But the smaller items, it is great to be able to use that glue. Now you'll see in just a minute we're going to start putting on the fur around the brim of the hat. And because I did do the flat back, we're just going to do the sides, and fill in the center as well. And of all things, we're going to be working with a garlic press. This was one of the things I didn't get to use when I was working with the snowman. So I did want to show this one on video. The snowman was so basic that, I thought you might learn a little bit more if I did the Santa. So you just squeeze out a little. And of course, making the fur around the brim of the hat, I didn't want it as long as if I was making his beard, for example. So just squeeze a little out and then just go all the way around the brim. And this would be something you could do with kids. They could even help make their Play-Doh because it's simply flour, salt, and water. And then if you were using something like that, I use the little knife, but the back of a plastic spoon would even be fine. Just something, that you can scrape it off of there without losing the shape that you just squeeze through. You still want to be able to tell its little individual pieces. And how long you make your fur and how long you make the beard, all of that is up to you, just a personal preference. You may want to make a really long beard. I thought about doing that and kind of curling it. But I just made a basic little beard. I did want it really full. So you'll see here as I'm filling in the beard section, I went ahead and put my glue on there. But I wanted very little of the face showing. I wanted all of that fur at the top, and then I could envision the beard and mustache and a big nose similar to a gnome nose. So that's the way I went with it. And see, if you pre-put that glue on there, you can just keep putting those little pieces of dough in and squeezing it through, and before you know it, you'll have your beard on there. When I made the mustache, of course, I kind of went in between the length of the fur on the hat and the beard. But again, just a personal thing, when the kids are doing it, they could really, really make it long and cute. Now, what you see me doing there is I'm trying to be mindful of that because gravity is going to make it. If you haven't got a really flat bottom, then gravity is going to make that soft dough kind of tilt. And I wanted to make sure he sat flat. So just every little bit, I would reach over and pick him up and I would re-flatten the bottom until it got dry enough that it wasn't distorting anymore. Because of that, is one of the reasons, as I said earlier, that I didn't want the Santa head to be, 360 degrees there all the way around. I just wanted it to have a flat back so that while it's drying, it's okay that it's flattening out on the back there, and all the decorative part is on the front. This took so many days to dry that Santa still isn't done. I'm sure by now he's dry, but I just ended up laying him aside and didn't get him finished. You'll see that later in the video. I kind of update you where the front of it was dried pretty well, but where it had been laying down, letting that front dry, it was still damp on the back. So I had started the painting just to see how it was going to take the paint and everything, but he's still not finished. One thing I would say is if you're going to make Santa, for example, into an ornament, you would want to either make sure to poke a hole in the top of it so that you can get the hanger on it, or you may even just want to do him similar to the way I did the snowman, leave him bald up there and then make a little felt hat or something that you would hot glue once it's completely dry. But if you're going to use the salt dough for all of it, just put a hole. Use that bamboo skewer, for example, and just put a hole in the top. Maybe in that fold would be a good place to do it. Alright, so I've just laid him aside and we're going to go back. It's a few days later and we're going to go back and work on the snowman. So there he is, all painted up, and that little blob turned out really cute after all. The paint really brings them to life. And you can see the little felt hat I put on there. And one thing I was going to mention, I went to a wreath that I had, and I just snipped off a couple of little pieces of the wood, and that's what I made his arms out of. When you insert those, you won't have to worry about them using glue or anything because it's going to dry and hold them secure. And what I'm doing there, as you can see, I have a whole stack of those. So what I decided to do was decoupage a snow scene, and I used a napkin. Now, I couldn't find my napkins at first, so I also had decoupaged using a scrap piece of material from a Christmas quilt. And I'll show that later in just a few minutes here in the video. But napkins are great to work with whenever you're decoupaging. So all you have to do is really coat it on the back, put the napkin on, and then put another coat on the front. And I did go ahead and just sprinkle a little bit of glitter on just to give it some shimmer. Yeah, there's the one that's the material. And I liked it, but the napkin was just a little bit lighter blue, and that's why I went with that one. And then once you let that dry, you can either cut the napkin away or you can tear it away. And these napkins, one thing to remember is they have 2 layers. The back layer is solid white. The top layer is your pretty blue. So I kept that white piece because I end up using it in the paper mache and decoupage later. Like now, there is going to be the base of it that's going to attach to that. I wanted to put that little trough in the back so that there was more for that to grip to versus trying to just connect it to a small spot on the circle. So I used Reynolds wrap for that. I created the trough, and then I just hot glued it onto the circle. I also kind of wadded up some little pieces of paper and napkin to make little snow drifts, snow piles. So they're also hot glued down. And once all of that was dried, we were ready to start the paper mache. This is where I'm showing you. Look, the back is still wet. But the front was already dry and paintable. But yeah, he just took so long that I just laid him aside. I knew he wasn't going to get done for the video. Now I have a couple of videos on paper mache. There's 2 different paste recipes that I use. This particular one, I just did a quick one with flour and water and ripped up my newspaper. And you just cover the entire thing. And I ended up doing 2 layers because after I got the newspaper on there and it dried, I took that white piece of napkin that was left and I just put it on there to kind of cover as much of the dark coming through, from the newspaper. That way it was less layers of paint. So that's just a tip if you want to do that. Or you can just, layer your paint. Just try to cover the dark print coming from the newspaper. But you want to make sure you go down the sides, and that'll give it a nice finish. The good thing about paper mache is it doesn't take long to dry. So as soon as I completed that, it didn't take long to get the white napkin on there. So you can see here I've just squirted the paint on, and that napkin really did a good job of taking away some of that darkness that the paint was going to have to cover. Now, one thing I did whenever I was putting my little piles of snow here and there is I knew how big the base of my snowman was. So I had to leave a flat spot so that he would be able to hot glue on there securely. Or, if you didn't want to hot gluing, that would still be okay. In case you decided next year maybe you just want to put a hanger on that little felt hat and put it on a tree as an ornament. You don't have to necessarily glue it down. This was just something I thought would be cute and a way that I could show you different techniques other than just using salt dough for an ornament. Now, as you can see around the back of it there on the rim, I have not painted it yet. I was undecided at first if I was going to paint it or try to put a piece of trim or a ribbon or something like that around it. But I did end up just going with the white. But just know, if you're not comfortable painting such tiny areas, you can get some really tiny ribbon and just put it right on there to cover it up and finish it off. Or when you're decoupaging the background there, the napkin on, fold the napkin over the back of it. You could do something like that just as easily. There is another clay that's homemade called cold porcelain. I do want to try that sometimes as well. Not necessarily for Christmas ornaments because you can do so many things with this stuff. So we'll do that in the future as well. But again, I hope you guys have a happy new year, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.